Mrs. Katz saw the war for democracy as a chance to point up the American woman's bondage. Most men were amazed. Why were women fighting for the vote? They couldn't spend it, they couldn't wear it. It would be useless to them.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the women's suffrage was a big part in history. It broke a barrier so important to the 21st century. Without this, women wouldn't be able to do more than half the things we did today. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wanted for women to have equal rights with men. She then held a convention at Seneca Falls. This was a big move in the 19th and 20th century. Her efforts to reform society by helping women and starting the women's rights suffrage started in 1848 and continued until the 1920s all around America. This was important because women wanted a reform and therefore needed the right to vote. The outcomes were different. It caused the 19th Amendment allowing women to vote and also granted them more rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton had the courage to speak for what she believed and overcame discrimination for all women. Back then, she did the impossible. And due to her, we have rights we wouldn't be able to have 100 years ago. And not only did she fight for women's rights, she helped with the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves. Before women's suffrage, society had different standards. There were many key factors that played a part in the women's suffrage. Part of it was society standards, and the other part was the legislative branch of government. Legislative created laws to prevent women from voting in political elections. There were many key people that caused the women's suffrage. Mayors, judges, and society did not want women participating in political elections. As stated, William Lloyd Garrison, leader of the abolitionist cause, called her a female demagogue. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was at her friend's house when they came up with the idea for women's rights. Then they arranged the Seneca Falls Convention for women's rights and then gained women. Then the Civil War started, halting the women's rights movement. After the war, two groups formed to reignite the women's suffrage. The women's suffrage started having successes and caused the Wyoming Territory to legalize voting for women aged 21 and older in 1869. Then in 1882, the U.S. Senate brung in the Women's Suffrage Committee and started a bill, but unfortunately, a large group of senators killed that bill. In 1890, NWSA, National Women's Suffrage Association, and AWSA, American Women's Suffrage Association, joined and created NAWSA, National American Women's Suffrage Association. On 1918, President Woodrow Wilson supported granting voting rights to women. On 1919, 52 years after the proposition, they granted the right and made the 19th Amendment. Some key ideas during the time were women were supposed to cook, take care of children, and clean. They were not expected to interfere in politics and men's conversations. The women's suffrage originally started in Seneca Falls in New York, but as it became more popular, it was widespread throughout America. Unique social standards during that time where men were above all, even women and children. That idea came from church. They believed Christ was head of the church, therefore men should be head of women and children. In the 1800s, there were major laws that prevented women from voting. Men were only allowed to vote. Issues from that law arose when Elizabeth Cady Stanton believed everyone should have the right to vote. Economy problems that contributed to the women's suffrage were women did not have the right to keep money. This barrier was created by social norms in America. Elizabeth Cady Stanton confronted these issues in her speeches.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States.
Short-term effects on breaking the barrier. As Elizabeth stated, we shall hold conventions in every county, distribute tracts, and circulate petitions in order, if possible, to arouse a proper self-respect in women. She also stated, until, in church and state, and at the fireside, the equality of women shall be fully recognized. Even though the women's suffrage was going quite well and on track, there were a few roadblocks. No matter how hard it got, Elizabeth Cady Stanton pushed back harder. However, it wasn't over yet. They still needed to focus on social, political, and economic problems for women. Elizabeth started asking for men to participate in the women's suffrage. She soon even got a letter from her husband stating, "I hope the morning telegrams will tell of many women all over the country trying to vote. It is splendid that without any concern of action, so many should have moved here." Elizabeth was successful in social issues. She just needed to focus on political and economic issues. Elizabeth soon has a petition to Massachusetts legislature for a 10-hour workday. She talks about the women of Massachusetts called for a 10-hour workday instead of a 14-hour workday. She then has one more problem to solve, which is political problems. In this speech to appeal to the women of New York, Elizabeth Cady Stanton says, "We now demand the ballot, trial by jury of our peers, and an equal right to the joint earnings of the marriage co-partnership. And until the Constitution be changed as to give us a voice in the government, we demand that man shall make all his laws on property, marriage, and divorce to bear equally on man and woman." Elizabeth was simply stating about how women should have the right to own property in marriage and divorce, and how they should have a say in Congress and the right to serve on juries. Elizabeth also says, "And secure to married women their property, received by gift or inheritance. Our last legislature passed a most liberal act, giving to married women their rights to sue for damages of person or property, to their separate earnings and their children, and to the widow, the possession and control of the entire estate during the minority of the youngest child. Women of New York, you can no longer be insulated in the first days of your widowed grief by the coarse minions of the law at your fireside, coolly taking an inventory of your household goods, or robbing your children of their natural guardian." The women's suffrage groups started having so many successes that they were split into two groups: NWSA, National Women's Suffrage Association, AWSA, American Women's Suffrage Association, and they eventually joined and created NAWSA, National American Women's Suffrage Association. A couple years later, after Elizabeth died, her plan worked, and now women were allowed to vote and do many more things. This is how women's suffrage broke a major barrier in history. 100 years later, in the 21st century, we are now able to do and are equal to all men. Women getting equal rights broke barriers in history.